in the air. Look at the electoral vote tally for each candidate right now. These are Fox News projections. Joe Biden, 264. President Trump at 214. The magic number, of course, is 270. Fox News called Arizona for Joe Biden last night, but Trump is slowly gaining ground there as more ballots trickle in. And last check, he's only trailing Biden by about 69,000 votes. Meanwhile, key races in Nevada, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina have not been called. And black voters could be the difference for the candidates in some of those key counties in those states. This morning, we are joined by 5 black community and civic leaders, Pastor John Allen Newman, Ashley McBride, Adrian White, Natasha Murphy, and Mackenzie Meadows. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
All righty. Well, I want to start with the two in the states that are still not called, Georgia and Pennsylvania. Ashley, you're in Pennsylvania, so how do you think African Americans in your state have impacted this election and will be impacted by it?
Absolutely. I think here in Pennsylvania, we're still anxiously awaiting. The country is waiting. As you know, this is the first time in Pennsylvania's history that voters across the state were allowed to essentially vote absentee or early vote without excuse. And so we saw over 3 million people who requested those ballots, and we're still waiting for them to be counted. We know that there are a considerable number of voters of color who use this option. And so in this state, we see each hour the numbers go down. But again, I think in the organization, I'm the state director for Our Future here. And while a lot of times when we talk about persuasion and messages of talking to voters, it's often been one type of voter, but we realize that there's a conversation that is happening amongst African American voters. And we're for certain and determined that, look, whatever happens, in the next couple of days here in Pennsylvania, it will be victory will be because African American voters turned out in huge numbers in this election.
Okay, Adrian, what's your take on the group when it comes to Georgia?
Yeah, African Americans are essential. As y'all know, we see that Atlanta numbers are making the difference. I know it's Fulton County, Clayton County, and DeKalb County, which are heavily African American populated, but I also want to highlight the areas outside of Metro Atlanta. I mean, almost everybody has a cousin from Georgia because of slavery. It was rooted in Georgia. And we have had a massive, incredible team. Black Votes Matter has been going to those areas of Georgia to make sure that we're engaging not just our urban center, but also our Black Belt Center, and really educating the Black voters to understand things like the fact that mortality here for Black women, maternal mortality is horrible. We are worse than third world countries. We've had Republican leadership in our state, and it's time for change because it's our lives on the line.
Pastor Newman, I want to get your thoughts on this. I know when it comes to newly registered voters, there was a huge growth in the Black community as well as within the Black male community. Why do you think that was the case this time around?
Well, I think, first of all, shout outs to Pennsylvania. I'm from Delaware County, Lansdowne, so I'm watching that very closely. My niece is the actual vice chair of Delaware County Democrats, which are all blue, by the way. I think that there has been a higher concentration on getting African American men to vote to counterbalance this false narrative that Black men are leaving Democratic Party or leaving progressive politics in mass because of the criminal efforts, or shall we say the criminal justice efforts of the so-called criminal justice efforts of the Trump administration, and clarifying that message and letting them know that it was actually President Obama who initiated criminal justice reform, but because Mitch McConnell's blockade in the Senate, he couldn't get it done. So I think that the numbers of African American men who registered and voted positively for Kamala Harris and, of course, next President Biden is simply a reaction and or a response to the false narrative that was perpetrated on them, unfortunately, by Jared Kushner and others, simply thinking that they could flip them because of a tactic that they denied to our previous illustrious president, Barack Obama.
Well, we'll have to see how the race goes, but I know at least in terms of the AP, they're saying that President Trump did extend his lead with blacks up 2 percentage points compared to 2016, so there was some growth there, even though it's projected to be overwhelmingly for Democrats when it comes to African Americans. Natasha and Mackenzie, you're all about mobilizing voters to the polls. So what issues do you think has increased interest in this election, and what will it take to keep the community engaged moving forward?
Well, I can kind of speak from the collegiate chapter perspective. As a young voter and someone who's voting in their first real major election, definitely young voters are looking for kind of the benefit of the doubt, what our future is going to look like post-COVID. What exactly is our job market, the economy? How are we going to be able to sustain ourselves once we enter the working world of corporate America? And really looking at the values that either candidate has, as well as looking at what policies will benefit us in the future. And that's really what Black Girls Vote is about, especially mobilizing young voters specifically and turning those into the leaders that we potentially will see to the later in today and future.
Okay. Lastly,
yes, and I completely agree.
All right.
With Black Girls Vote, a lot of the outreach efforts that we hear from the community is we are looking for tangible policies that are going to advance our communities economically, reduce health disparities, and ensure that our entire community has access to equitable education. So, this renewed interest in our democracy is incredibly exciting for election 2020, and it's been fantastic to see, such high rates of voter turnout in the African American community, and particularly amongst our young voters of color. And we definitely want, in exchange for this active participation in democracy, the policy that's going to advance our communities.
Well, thank you all so much. I wish we had more time, but I thank you, Natasha, Mackenzie, Pastor Newman, Ashley, and Adrian. Did I get you all in there? Get everybody?
Yes, you did.
All right. Thanks so much. And moving forward, you can also connect with Vote America. The website information is on your screen.